At 19, Emily left behind her old life in the small market town of Ashford, nestled in the English countryside, to start anew. Her parents had stayed behind in their home in Derby, but Emily yearned for independence, a fresh start far from the familiar streets and faces she'd known all her life. She moved into a modest room above her Aunt Margaret's quaint cottage on the outskirts of Ashford. The walls were thin, the creaky wooden floorboards whispered with every step, and the scent of lavender from the garden below filled the air. It wasn't much, but it was hers. By day, Emily juggled odd jobs, waiting tables at the local cafe, folding laundry at the laundrette, and running errands for neighbors. But her true dream was simple: to save enough money to buy a laptop. She wanted to become a virtual assistant, working online, her own boss, free from the constraints of the tedious day-to-day grind. She imagined typing away in cozy cafes, sipping black coffee, and making her own hours. It felt like freedom. One afternoon, while scrolling through job listings on an old second-hand laptop at the library, Emily spotted a temporary vacancy at a garden center called Green Haven. It was just a 4-week stint. Watering plants, arranging pots, helping customers. Nothing glamorous, but it paid a bit better than the cafe, and the idea of working surrounded by greenery, the scent of fresh earth and morning dew, seemed almost poetic. She applied on a whim and was accepted quickly. On her first day, her nerves fluttered like the new leaves on the rose bushes she watered. The garden center was tucked on the edge of Ashford, a few miles from the town center, where rows of greenhouses spilled light through glass panes clouded with condensation. Emily was greeted by the foreman, a grizzled man named Mr. Baker, stoic, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a voice like gravel. His presence was imposing, but he said little, giving her a curt nod before walking away. Among the other workers, Emily noticed a young man with a relaxed slouch and a faded band t-shirt featuring a vintage rock logo. His hair was a messy mop of sandy blonde, tousled as if he'd just rolled out of bed. His name was Jack. Jack didn't notice her at first, but when they bumped into each other by the orchids, a delicate display of pastel blooms, he murmured, "Careful, these ones are as temperamental as the customers." Emily smiled, unsure if he was joking or serious. Over the next week, lunch breaks found them sitting on weathered wooden crates behind the storage shed, sharing stories about the unpredictable English weather, childhood memories, and the latest internet memes. Jack's voice was deep and slightly raspy, with a kind of rough charm that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Emily usually wore simple cotton dresses to work, light, airy, and modest, fitting just enough to hint at the shape beneath without shouting for attention. Her favorite was a pale blue summer dress with tiny white polka dots, cinched slightly at the waist, paired with white canvas sneakers scuffed from too many walks around Ashford. Aunt Margaret often teased her, saying Emily looked like a proper young lady in it. Emily caught Jack's eyes on her sometimes, quick and shy glances that felt electric. He never stared blatantly, but the way his gaze lingered was enough to make her pulse race. After a week, Emily realized she found herself eagerly awaiting lunch breaks, just for the chance to sit next to Jack and talk. One evening, after the garden center had closed and the other workers had left, Emily and Jack lingered in the old greenhouse surrounded by rows of lavender seedlings. The air was thick with moisture and the heady scent of herbs, the fading light casting soft shadows through the glass. Jack was unusually silent, his eyes fixed on her. When his hand brushed against hers, he didn't pull away. A shiver ran through her, and she found herself unable to speak. "Has anyone ever told you that you're like the morning dew?" he said softly. Emily blinked, then laughed quietly. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "A compliment," Jack replied seriously. "Fresh, fleeting, and somehow disappearing before you realize it." From that moment, Jack began walking Emily home after their shifts, their steps slow and unhurried, sometimes wordless. One evening, Emily wore a floral print dress that fluttered just above her knees and strappy leather sandals wrapping delicately around her ankles like ribbons. Jack's eyes traced the line of her legs with such intent it felt like he was reading a secret story written there. It wasn't crude or lecherous, it was reverence, a quiet hunger that made Emily feel desired and respected all at once. As the temporary job neared its end, Jack suggested a walk to the nearby lake at dusk. Emily slipped off her shoes, carrying them in her hands while Jack carried her bag. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the grassy bank, the sun melting below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I only took this job to save up for a laptop," Emily admitted. Her voice small amidst the gentle lapping of the water. Jack turned to her, his gaze steady and warm. I think I came here to find you. His words hit her like a gust of wind, unexpected and thrilling. When her final day came, Emily knew this was no fleeting summer romance. Jack never shouted his feelings or grabbed her hands in public, but in his quiet presence, she found a depth of emotion that words couldn't touch. He invited her to celebrate her last day at a secret spot in the woods, a place where they could cook over a fire and be alone. That morning, Emily agonized over what to wear. She settled on a black sundress with thin straps that revealed her collarbones and the golden tan she'd earned from long days outside. Her hair was swept into a high bun, with a few loose strands softening her jawline. On her feet were leather sandals with ankle straps, delicate as bracelets. Aunt Margaret eyed her skeptically. Going to the woods dressed like that? You're not planning to charm the trees, are you? They drove in Jack's battered old Ford, the engine coughing and sputtering but still reliable. Emily carried a picnic basket filled with snacks, while Jack entertained her with local legends, stories of an old manor that once stood near the forest, later replaced by a youth camp, all now swallowed by moss and shadow under towering pines, where dappled light filtered like stained glass. Jack spread a blanket and lit a fire. The world narrowed to the crackling flames and the scent of pine resin. Emily watched Jack handle the skewers with practiced ease, marveling at the calm radiating from him. You're not like the others, Jack said suddenly, eyes fixed on the fire. Most girls would be snapping selfies, making a fuss. But you just sit. Like you belong here. Maybe I do, Emily said with a smile. Maybe I'm a ghost. Then you're the most beautiful ghost I've ever seen. He handed her a piece of grilled meat, his hand trembling slightly. For the first time, Emily saw the nervousness beneath Jack's steady exterior, and it thrilled her. They sat close but didn't touch, except for fleeting moments. A brush of fingers on her knee as he passed a cup, an accidental elbow against her shoulder. Each contact sent sparks through her skin, the electricity of unspoken desire crackling in the cool evening air. Can I tell you something? Jack's voice was rough with emotion. Always. When I'm with you, it's hard to stay calm. You test my patience, but I'm trying. I don't want to lose control. Emily leaned in, whispering, then hold on tight. His gaze was intense, stirring something wild inside her, but instead of closing the distance, he simply said, because if I let go, I'm afraid you'd run. The tension between them was a game, tense, sensual, and maddening. They returned to Ashford late, and at her door, Jack's fingers brushed her wrist. I'm not rushing, he said softly, but know this, I'm serious. I want to be with you for real. Emily stood frozen, fingertips tracing the warmth where his touch lingered long after he'd walked away. Since that night, everything seemed to shift. Their connection deepened, though no kisses or embraces sealed it yet. Jack appeared beneath her window at odd times, sometimes with ice cream, other times with a jar of homemade apricot jam from his grandmother's kitchen. Emily wore thin cotton robes, deliberately choosing garments with delicate scents and soft textures. Knowing he noticed that it became a silent dance, a shared secret between them. Then one day, Jack vanished at first. Emily thought he was late or ill. She sent messages, but they went unanswered. Days passed, each heavier than the last. Rumors at the garden center said Jack had left suddenly, without explanation, supposedly to visit his father in another town. Emily sat on a bench by the market square, her white summer dress dotted with tiny blue flowers, her rubber sandals squelching slightly in the damp. She felt exposed, foolish, even like a child caught in a storm without shelter. A week later, a single word appeared on her phone screen. Sorry. Emily stared at it, her heart a chaotic mess of relief, anger, and confusion. Before she could reply, Jack showed up at her door, weary and unshaven, eyes heavy with unshed sorrow. I was in Cambridge with my dad, he said quietly. He got sick. It happened fast. I didn't want to drag you into it. Sorry for disappearing. Emily said nothing, only opened the door wider. His warmth enveloped her as he stepped inside. She wore a soft gray knit dress, slightly rumpled, with a silver ankle bracelet glinting faintly. Jack's gaze flicked to it, his eyes softening. I missed you, he whispered, and this time she didn't pull away. His kiss was gentle, careful, almost afraid to break the fragile peace they'd built. When they parted, Emily's legs trembled not from weakness, but from the electric promise of what was to come. His fingers traced her cheeks slowly. You smell like mint." The morning sun spilled lazily through the thin curtains of Emily's modest room, casting soft golden stripes across the faded floral wallpaper. The scent of damp earth and freshly brewed tea drifted up from Aunt Margaret's kitchen below, mingling with the faint trace of lavender from the garden that crept through the cracked window. Emily lay in bed a few moments longer than usual, savoring the quiet before the day's demands pulled her back into motion. Today wasn't just any day. It marked the beginning of her second week working at Green Haven. The garden center buzzed with a different kind of energy now. The tentative glances between her and Jack had grown into easy smiles. The stiffness of the first day had melted under the warmth of shared jokes and whispered confessions. But beneath the simple rhythms of watering plants and stacking pots was an undercurrent Emily couldn't ignore. A thrilling tension that hummed like the bees among the lavender. She dressed carefully, choosing a pale green cotton dress with a subtle leafy pattern, the fabric clinging softly to her curves without revealing too much. Her feet slipped into worn brown leather sandals, the kind that wrapped around her ankles in delicate straps and had already molded to the shape of her steps. Around her neck, she wore a thin silver chain with a small acorn pendant, a gift from Aunt Margaret, who claimed it was a symbol of growth and new beginnings. Emily smiled to herself, feeling the pendant's cool weight against her collarbone. Stepping outside, the air was crisp with the familiar scent of grass and rain-soaked earth. She walked the narrow lane to Green Haven, the town of Ashford barely stirring around her. The village square's cobblestones glistened faintly from the morning dew, and the old clock tower chimed softly in the distance. The garden center. The day unfolded in a series of small, comforting routines. Emily watered rows of tulips and daffodils, her hands brushing the soft petals, careful not to crush the fragile blooms. She arranged pots of primroses and geraniums on the display tables, their bright colors a stark contrast to the muted browns and greens of the soil and leaves. Customers drifted in and out, some familiar faces from Ashford, others tourists passing through on their way to the nearby countryside. Jack was there as usual, his sandy hair tousled and eyes gleaming with that quiet mischief Emily had come to adore. Today he wore a faded navy t-shirt emblazoned with a band logo she didn't recognize, paired with well-worn jeans and scuffed sneakers speckled with dirt. A thin silver bracelet encircled his wrist, a small detail she noticed but never commented on during their lunch break. They retreated behind the storage sheds, settling onto the same weathered wooden crates that had become their unofficial meeting spot. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and wildflowers, and the hum of bees filled the silence between their words. Jack pulled a crumpled packet of crisps from his pocket and offered some to Emily. "You know," he began, crunching thoughtfully, "I'm convinced plants have better social lives than we do." Emily laughed, the sound light and free. "How so?" "Think about it," Jack said, propping his elbow on his knee. "They're rooted in one place, but they're constantly interacting, competing for sunlight, sharing nutrients underground. We run around like headless chickens, but they just exist connected." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "Sounds peaceful." "Sometimes," Jack admitted, "but sometimes it's brutal. Ever seen a vine choke a tree to death? Nature's version of a hostile takeover." She shivered playfully. "That's dark for a lunch conversation." Jack's grin was slow and mischievous. "What can I say? I like my nature with a twist." Their easy banter was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Whitaker, the garden center's owner, a spry woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes sharp enough to spot a missing spade from a mile away. "Jack, Emily," she called, "could you both come help with the spring display? We've got new stock coming in." They nodded, standing and brushing dirt from their hands. As they moved through the greenhouses, Emily felt a familiar warmth in Jack's presence, a steadying force amid the chaos of pots and plants. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rows of begonias and fuchsias, Emily found herself alone in the orchid section. The delicate flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their colors vibrant and exotic against the lush greenery. Jack appeared quietly beside her, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. "For the queen of the orchids," he teased, handing her a cup wrapped in a napkin. Emily smiled, accepting the warmth. The tea's fragrant steam curled between them as they leaned against the wooden shelf, their shoulders nearly touching. "Do you believe in luck?" Jack asked suddenly, his voice low. Emily considered. "Depends. Are we talking about finding a 4-leaf clover or getting a parking spot in Ashford on market day?" Jack chuckled. "Fair point." "I know, seriously," she pressed, eyes meeting his. Do you believe some things happen for a reason? Jack's gaze flickered away, then back steady and honest. I think sometimes we make our own luck. We create the moments that change us. Emily felt a flutter in her chest, the tantalizing hint of something more hanging between them. She wanted to reach out to bridge the small gap, but hesitated. Jack's hand brushed hers, fingers grazing softly. An electric touch that made her breath catch. Dinner tomorrow? He asked quietly. Emily nodded, cheeks warming. I'd like that. As they parted ways that evening, Emily walked home slowly, the cool air wrapping around her like a comforting shawl. The village was quiet now, lanterns casting pools of golden light on the cobblestones. She thought of Jack, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his voice, and felt a surge of hope she hadn't dared to admit before. But beneath the promise of new beginnings, a shadow lingered, an unspoken secret in Jack's silence, a hesitation in his touch, that whispered of challenges yet to come. And as Emily closed her bedroom window against the night chill, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. Somewhere in the depths of Ashford's ancient woods, a mystery waited, tangled like the roots beneath the forest floor, ready to unravel everything they thought they knew. The sun had barely risen over Ashford when Emily awoke to the soft chime of her phone. A message from Jack blinked on the screen. *, meet me at the old mill at 6 tonight. I've got something to show you. *, the cryptic note sent a flutter through her chest, part excitement, part apprehension. The old mill wasn't far from the garden center, a relic from the town's industrial past, now silent and overgrown, wrapped in ivy and mystery. All day, Emily's mind danced between anticipation and anxiety. What could Jack want to show her? A secret hideout? A forgotten treasure? Or perhaps something more personal? She dressed with care, choosing a soft blush pink dress that swayed just above her knees, the fabric light and breathable for the warm spring evening. The dress hugged her waist gently but left her shoulders bare, the thin straps framing her collarbones like delicate brushstrokes. On her feet were her favorite leather sandals, the ones that laced around her ankles, their worn soles whispering stories of countless walks. She added a silver charm bracelet to her wrist, a gift from Aunt Margaret, its tiny leaves and acorns catching the fading light. A subtle scent of jasmine clung to her skin, the fragrance soft and inviting without overpowering. As the day wore on, Emily found herself stealing glances at the clock, counting down the hours until she could meet Jack. Her heart beat a steady rhythm of hope and nerves, a melody she hadn't known she'd been missing. When 6 o'clock finally arrived, she made her way to the mill, the path winding through hedgerows heavy with wildflowers. The air was thick with the scent of earth and blooming lilacs, the golden hour casting long shadows that danced between the trees. Jack was already there, leaning against the weathered stone wall of the mill, his figure silhouetted by the setting sun. His sandy hair caught the light, a halo of gold amidst the creeping twilight. He wore a simple white shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dark jeans, the casual attire making his strong shoulders and lean frame more pronounced. A faint smile played on his lips as he saw her approach. "Emily," he greeted softly, pushing off the wall. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. Jack took her hand, guiding her through a narrow gate entwined with honeysuckle. Inside the mill's courtyard, the air held a hushed reverence, broken only by the distant call of a nightingale and the rustle of leaves. "I found this place a few months ago," Jack said, eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and nostalgia. "It used to be a meeting spot for the locals back in the day. Now it's our little secret." Emily looked around, taking in the crumbling walls draped in ivy, the ancient wooden beams arching overhead. Fairy lights twinkled softly, strung between the rafters, a touch of magic in the fading dusk. Jack pulled a small picnic basket from behind a stack of crates, revealing an assortment of homemade treats: crusty bread, sharp cheddar, and a jar of strawberry jam that glistened like rubies. He poured 2 glasses of elderflower cordial, the bubbles catching the light like tiny stars. They sat side by side on a patchwork blanket, the cool stone beneath them softened by the fabric. As they ate, their conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving between dreams and memories, fears and hopes. Emily felt the weight of the world lift, replaced by a tender warmth blooming inside her chest. Jack's laughter was rich and genuine, his eyes alight with a vulnerability he rarely showed. At one point, he reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "So do you." The moment stretched, suspended between them like a fragile thread. Jack's fingers grazed her hand, tentative, then firmer. His breath hitched as their eyes locked, the unspoken longing pulsing in the space between. But just as the world seemed poised to tilt, a distant sound shattered the silence. A sharp crack like breaking glass. They both turned toward the noise, hearts pounding. From the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness, moving with a deliberate, unsettling grace. Jack's jaw tightened. "Stay close," he whispered, pulling Emily gently to her feet. The stranger stepped into the fading light, revealing a face Emily didn't recognize but somehow felt she should. Eyes cold and unreadable, lips pressed into a thin line. "Jack," the figure said, voice low and unmistakably familiar. "We need to talk." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The evening's magic twisted into something darker, heavier. Who was this mysterious visitor? What secrets did they carry? And how would their arrival change everything between Emily and Jack? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the old mill into shadow, Emily realized their story was no longer just about love and hope. It was about survival, trust, and the shadows lurking just beyond the light. The figure stepped forward, the dim glow from the fairy lights catching the sharp angles of his face. He was tall with dark hair slicked back, and eyes like storm clouds, intense, unreadable. There was a hardness about him that sent a chill down Emily's spine, as if he carried the weight of secrets best left buried. Jack's hand tightened around hers, a silent anchor in the growing tension. "Simon," Jack said, his voice low but steady, the name carrying an unmistakable edge. Emily's gaze flicked between the two men, sensing a history tangled in the brief exchange. Simon's eyes never left Jack's, the unspoken words hanging thick in the air like fog. Simon's lips curled into a grim smile. "It's been a while, Jack. I hear you've been busy." "Not here for small talk," Jack replied, stepping protectively closer to Emily. "What do you want?" Simon's eyes flicked to Emily, lingering just a moment too long. "That's not for you to know," he said, voice cold. "But you're involved now, whether you like it or not." Emily's heart pounded, the playful evening evaporating like mist. She realized then that the quiet town of Ashford held shadows deeper than she had imagined, shadows that now threatened to engulf them all. "Why don't you tell her what this is about?" Jack's voice was sharper, his posture taut with barely contained anger. Simon hesitated, then nodded. "There's things from the past, things Jack thought were buried, but they're resurfacing and they're dangerous. For all of us." Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of the familiar. But Jack's steady presence kept her grounded. "Dangerous how?" she asked, voice trembling but determined. Simon's gaze darkened. "You don't want to know. But if you're with him, you're in the crossfire." Jack's jaw clenched. "We'll face it together. Whoever comes after me will have to get through both of us." The tension crackled between the three of them like static electricity. Emily felt the fragile thread of their evening snap, replaced by a cold reality that wrapped around her heart. Simon stepped back, his eyes never leaving Jack's. "This isn't over," he said, voice low. "Be ready." Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he melted into the shadows, leaving Emily and Jack alone amid the crumbling walls and waning light. Jack exhaled slowly, his grip on her hand loosening just a fraction. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he murmured. Emily looked up at him, the man she was beginning to trust, the man whose presence had become a beacon in her life. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jack's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift. But somewhere in the depths of his gaze, Emily sensed the battle was only just beginning. As they walked back through the winding paths toward the village, the shadows lengthened, and the night whispered secrets that neither of them could yet understand. And in the distance, beyond the reach of street lamps and warm windows, a pair of eyes watched silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night air was cool, wrapping around Emily and Jack like a cloak as they walked the narrow, winding lanes back toward the heart of Ashford. The village was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, not peaceful, with only the distant hoot of an owl breaking the stillness. Emily's fingers curled tightly around Jack's, seeking comfort in the warmth of his touch, though her mind raced with questions she wasn't ready to voice. Jack glanced at her, His jaw tight, eyes shadowed beneath the flickering street lamps. I should have told you sooner, he said quietly. This Simon. He's from a part of my life I wanted to forget. Emily's heart quickened. What part? Jack hesitated, then shook his head. Not now. It's complicated. They reached the small square where the old bakery still had its sign swinging gently in the breeze. The golden light spilled from its windows, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. Emily looked up at the night sky, the stars hazy behind the clouds, and took a deep breath. I don't care how complicated it is, she said firmly. I'm not walking away. Jack stopped, turning to face her fully. I'm glad. Because whatever comes next, you won't be alone. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. Emily swallowed, longing to close the distance, to feel his arms around her, but Jack's expression was guarded, as if protecting her, and himself, from something unseen. They parted at her doorstep with a quiet promise, and Emily stood alone in the glow of the porch light, the echo of Simon's warning still ringing in her ears. The following days were a whirlwind of normalcy tinged with unease. At Green Haven, the garden center blossomed with spring life, vibrant tulips, fragrant hyacinths, and the cheerful chatter of customers eager to fill their gardens after the long winter. Emily threw herself into her work, finding solace in the simple tasks of watering and pruning, arranging pots in neat rows that seemed to impose order on the chaos swirling in her mind. Jack was there too, his usual easygoing demeanor tempered by a quiet tension. He spoke little of Simon or the shadows that clung to his past, but Emily sensed the battle raging beneath the surface. One afternoon, as they stacked terracotta pots near the rose bushes, Jack suddenly paused, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. You're different, he said softly. Not like anyone I've ever known. Emily smiled, a flush rising to her cheeks. I'm just me. Didn't know, Jack insisted, eyes locked on hers. You're stronger, braver, and somehow you make me want to be better. Before she could respond, a harsh voice interrupted. Jack. There you are. Mrs. Whitaker, the garden center's owner, approached with a clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes narrowing. We've got a delivery coming in tomorrow morning, she said briskly. I'll need you both bright and early. Jack nodded, glancing at Emily with a faint smile. Looks like we're stuck here a while longer. Emily laughed softly, the sound lightening the tension between them. That evening, Emily stood before her mirror, adjusting the delicate silver necklace Aunt Margaret had given her, the one with the tiny acorn pendant that had become a talisman for new beginnings. She chose a soft lavender dress for their dinner, its fabric flowing and light, the neckline dipping just enough to reveal the curve of her collarbone without being overt. Her hair was swept into loose waves that framed her face, and she wore simple leather sandals that wrapped elegantly around her ankles. When Jack arrived, he looked at her with a mixture of awe and something deeper, something Emily was only beginning to understand. Over candlelight in a cozy little bistro tucked away from the village's main street, they shared stories and laughter, the world outside fading until it was just the two of them. But beneath the flickering candles and soft music, Emily felt the undercurrent of danger lurking just beyond their bubble, a reminder that their fragile happiness could shatter at any moment. As the night deepened, Jack grew quieter, his gaze distant. Finally, he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. There's something you need to know, he said, voice low. Emily leaned in, heart pounding. Jack's eyes were serious. Simon isn't just a ghost from my past. He's connected to things darker than I ever wanted to admit. Emily's breath caught. What kind of things? Jack swallowed hard. Things that could put you in danger. I'm trying to protect you, but I don't know if I can. She squeezed his hand, determination hardening inside her. We'll face it together. Whatever comes outside. The wind picked up, rattling the windows as shadows lengthened and the night whispered of secrets yet to be revealed. And deep in the woods beyond Ashford, a figure watched from the darkness, eyes gleaming with silent intent. The real game was only just beginning.